Idam tu te guyatamam. I was just quoting this verse the other day. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Idam tu te guyatamam pavakshamam suyave Gyanam Vijnana Sahitam Yajgatva Mokshase Shubhat. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Purport. As a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote, the messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed amongst devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. The devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness, and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna in the association of devotees. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. Lord Krishna, in order to encourage Arjuna to higher and higher elevation in his potent service, describes in this 9th chapter matters more confidential than any he has already disclosed. The very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the 1st chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book, and in the 2nd and 3rd chapters, the spiritual knowledge described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service, and because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed pure devotion, therefore this is called the most confidential. One who is situated in the most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pains, although he is in the material world. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that although one who has a sincere desire to render loving service to the Supreme Lord is situated in the conditioned state of material existence, he is to be considered liberated. Similarly, we shall find in the Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, that anyone who is engaged in that way is a liberated person. Now this first verse has specific significance. The words idam jnanam, this knowledge, refers to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping, praying, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. By the practice of these 9 elements of devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand the science of Krishna. Simply to understand that a living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization, but one should recognize the difference between activities of the body and the spiritual activities of one who understands that he is not the body. In the 7th chapter, we have already discussed the opulent potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his different energies, the inferior and superior natures, and all this material manifestation. Now in chapter 9, the glories of the Lord will be delineated. The Sanskrit word anasuyave in this verse is also very significant. Generally, the commentators, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of Krishna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the most erudite scholars write on Bhagavad Gita very inaccurately. Because they are envious of Krishna, their commentaries are useless. The commentaries given by devotees of the Lord are bona fide. No one can explain Bhagavad Gita or give perfect knowledge of Krishna if he is envious. One who criticizes the character of Krishna without knowing him is a fool. So such commentary should be very carefully avoided. For one who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, pure and transcendental personality, these chapters will be very beneficial. Prabhupada makes it very clear, as he always does, that to comment on the activities, pastimes, instructions of the Supreme Lord, one actually has to be situated on a platform of devotion. Means, as he's explaining here, he has to be submissive to Krishna's instructions. If he's not submissive to Krishna's instructions, then how can he purely represent Krishna or the Parampara? And to be envious of Krishna, as described here, which is the essence of the verse. Krishna is telling Arjuna, because you're never envious of me, therefore I shall continue to give you more and more knowledge about me. But those who are envious of Krishna means that they don't want to submit themselves, take the subordinate role. They always offer arguments as to why is Krishna supreme, and why is it that we cannot enjoy like him. That's the usual, oftentimes, argument people object to. And what it really comes down to fundamentally is because Krishna's God and we're not. And it can't be changed. So Prabhupada is here saying that because Arjuna never had this envious position towards the Lord, he was always submissive to the will of the Lord, and was always eager to serve the Lord. Therefore, he was fit and qualified to receive progressive understanding about his the Lord's transcendental qualities and transcendental position. And therefore this verse opens the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is described as the most confidential knowledge about Krishna, where Krishna actually describes his reciprocal relationship with his devotees. And therefore Prabhupada says here, it comes to the platform of pure devotional service. Pure devotional service means unmotivated, uninterrupted. Savai pung samparo dharmo yato bhaktiradhok sache. That unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service is actually the qualification for Krishna to give complete reciprocation. Ye yatamam prapajante tang satai vijanyaham, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Therefore, there's a very nice description given in the Srimad Bhagavatam how pure devotional service is the only means for controlling the Lord. The Lord is very inclined to give something, as we were describing today, reciprocal relationship that exists between one person and another. That the Lord is very inclined to reciprocate with love, and will never fail to reciprocate with love. But the nature of love is that the devotee doesn't want anything in return. That's the characteristic of love. And therefore in the story of Durvasa Muni and Maharaj Ambarish in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is told how, because of Maharaj Ambarish's pure unalloyed love to the Lord, he conquered the Lord, and therefore when the Lord was very much inclined to protect him from the behavior of Durvasa Muni, he invoked his Sudarshan Chakra and began chasing after Durvasa Muni, the Sudarshan Chakra. Durvasa Muni, out of fear, ran for shelter to Lord Brahma, who could not provide him shelter. He ran to Lord Shiva, who could not provide him shelter. And then he went directly to Lord Vishnu and asked Lord Vishnu, certainly you can give me shelter. And Lord Vishnu said, no, I can't. And for Durvasa Muni, it was very difficult for him to understand why the Lord would not give him shelter. And in reference to this, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Krishna, Lord Vishnu told Durvasa Muni, he said that I'm not independent, I'm completely under control of my devotees, and I cannot act independent from the desires of my devotees. And he says that the devotee is in my heart, I am in the heart of the devotee. The devotee doesn't know anyone but me, and I don't know anyone but him. So Durvasa Muni says to the Lord, he says, certainly you are independent Supreme Lord, how can you say you're not independent? How can you say you're dependent? You're independent, you can do whatever you wish. And certainly if you see a person suffering who's coming to you for shelter, you being the Supreme Lord, you will give him shelter. I'm coming to you for shelter. But the Lord said, but I can't, he said, I don't have a mind to think about you. I don't have a heart to think about you. And Durvasa Muni was bewildered by this, saying, how can you possibly say you don't have a mind and a heart to think of my suffering? And then the Lord goes on to explain, he said, so the reason being is because my pure devotee, he has no motivation, has no inclination to serve me for any purposes whatsoever except to satisfy me. So therefore, because I'm so pleased by such unmotivated service, I want to give something to my devotee. So I ask my devotee, what can I give in your return? But my devotee always says, I don't want anything in return. I want nothing, I simply want the opportunity to serve you. And therefore, the Lord says, but I must give you something, please ask for something. And the devotee always insists, no, just the only thing I ask is, let me serve you. So because the devotee doesn't want anything, but because there's a reciprocal relationship between the Lord and the devotee, the Lord says that, all right, even though you don't want and you don't ask, still I'll give you the most valuable treasure I have in my treasure house. So what can be valuable for the devotee? It's not wealth, it's not power, it's not strength. So therefore the Lord explained to Durvasa Muni, I gave to my devotee Maharaj Ambarish, because of his pure unalloyed love, because he didn't want anything, I gave him the most valuable thing I had. I gave him my heart. So you're asking for me, please have a heart. And I'm telling you, I don't have a heart. It's over there. Maharaj Ambarish has my heart. So, therefore, if you want protection, if you want shelter, if you want my forgiveness, you have to go where my heart is. So you go to Maharaj Ambarish. So this is how Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes the characteristics of pure devotion. Pure devotional service is ahaitukya pratihata, unmotivated, uninterrupted, and it is the only means by which the Lord can be completely brought under control, and therefore so much under control that he had to tell Durvasa Muni, I'm not independent, I'm controlled by my devotee. This is the pure devotional service which Krishna is revealing to Arjuna in this chapter, the characteristic of pure devotional service, which is freed from any motivation and which is uninterrupted, and is described as the most confidential knowledge disclosed to Arjuna to this point. Why? Because Arjuna never was envious of Krishna's position and was always recognizing his position as subordinate servant to Krishna. Idam tute bhuyatamam bhavakshamana suyave jnana vijnana sahitam yudhyatva mokshase subhat. My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.